What place is this that is my world? What dark coil has my spirit embodied? In light I see my skin as black. In darkness it glows white in the heat of this rage I cannot dismiss. Would that I had the courage to depart this place or this life, or to stand openly against the wrongness that is the world of these, my kin. To seek an existence that does not run afoul to that which I believe, and to that which I hold dear. Faith is truth. Zaknafein Do'Urden I am called, yet a drow I am not, by choice or by deed. Let them discover this being that I am then. Let them rain their wrath on these old shoulders already burdened by the hopelessness of Menzoberranzan. Menzoberranzan, what hell are you? Zaknafein Do'Urden. Zaknafein began his life as a commoner, born sometime in the 10th century DR in Menzoberranzan, where the worth of every individual is measured by station. Zak carried no station. It was his talent with the blade and his unrelenting will that propelled him to become one of the greatest weapon masters the Drow city had ever seen. He trained at Melee Magthair, the academy where Menzoberranzan forged its male warriors, and there he learned the two-blade style of the Uda Drow. His skill became a problem almost at once. The masters kept him muted in his sparring, holding back his practices so that a commoner would not humiliate the sons of noble houses in front of the entire academy. He won the discipline anyway, graduating at the top of his class while the instructors worked to keep his brilliance from showing. By 1018, he served House Simfrey, a minor family clinging to the lower rungs of the city's hierarchy. He was their weapon master and the consort of their matron, Divine Simfrey, who intended him as the sire of a generation of Simfrey children. Whispers of his reputation climbed the cavern walls toward QL Arzorel, where the great houses watched from above. Uth the gentle Armgo took note of him, Jarlaxle Baenre studied him from afar, and the ambitious matron Malice Do'Urden decided she would have him. House Treyrock was plotting to eliminate House Simfrey. Malice moved before the war even began, working through matron Drizzt Do'Urden and the mercenary Jarlaxle. She paid to ensure that Zaknafein would survive the destruction of House Simfrey. The night House Treyrock attacked, Zorloran wizards shattered the Simfrey gates with lightning and fire, and the Treyrock warriors poured through. The Simfrey defenders fell back outnumbered and overwhelmed, all but one. Zaknafein came out onto the bridges between the towers alone. His sword and whip in hand, he turned the assault into a slaughter. He fought through lizard riders and polearm formations, using his whip to tangle weapons and his blades to open the gaps. He showed a pattern that night that would define him for the rest of his life. Against the common warriors of House Treyrock, he pulled his strikes, wounding and disarming instead of taking their lives. But against the priestesses, he showed no mercy. First Priestess Donjalina Treyrock caught Zak with a holding spell, a Dweomer that should have frozen him in place while her brother Duvan rode in for the kill. Zaknafein had trained for his entire life for exactly this. He had studied the priestesses of Loth and learned to recognize their magic and to fight through it, and so he stood perfectly still, feigning to be under her spell. When Duvan's lizard closed the distance, Zaknafein exploded into motion, drove the rider down, and crossed the field to cut the throat from the first priestess. For all her wards and divine protections, she died on the field at his hands. Jarlaxle watched the whole performance from the tower wall, growing more certain by the moment that he had undercharged Matron Drizzt for the contract. When Zaknafein finally turned on him, the two clashed, and Zaknafein chased the mercenary until Jarlaxle threw a black cloth into the dirt that opened into a pit. Zaknafein dropped through it. He landed inside an extra-dimensional pocket, an empty cube of nowhere space, and a heartbeat later, his whip snapped up out of the darkness, caught Jarlaxle by the ankle, and dragged the mercenary down after him. That was the first meeting between Zaknafein and Jarlaxle. They fought in the shifting blackness, sword against sword, gravity throwing them from floor to wall and back, and in that strangest of prisons, the most enduring friendship of either of their lives began. Jarlaxle explained the truth between the exchanges. House Semfrey was already gone, Matron Divine was dead, and Matron Malice Do'Urden had purchased Zaknafein to serve as her weapon master and her consort. Jarlaxle revealed, wand in hand, that he alone held the means to leave the portable hole. Zaknafein's whip stripped the wand from his hand, and he turned it on himself to escape and strand the mercenary in his own trap. Jarlaxle had expected exactly that. The wand was a trap of its own. A glob of viscid goo slammed Zaknafein into the wall and held him fast, close to suffocating him, while Jarlaxle calmly freed his airway and climbed out alone. He folded the cube back into a scrap of black cloth and carried Zaknafein away in his pocket, still trapped inside. Jarlaxle released him later in the Bregandierth lair beneath the claw rift. Zaknafein tumbled a dozen feet out of the reopened pocket and landed in a lichen-lit pit, his captors looking down from above. Zaknafein had no real path but House Do'Urden. He extracted one condition before he yielded. He wanted the right to kill Matron Hawes Treyrock himself, the matron who had ordered the attack on his house. Jarlaxle agreed. Later, Zaknafein walked into the Treyrock throne room and took Matron Hawes' head. He spared her surviving daughter, Dabney, on Jarlaxle's word, and sent her to the Claw Rift to begin a new life among the houseless rogues of Bregandierth. By the time this exchange had ended, House Semfrey and House Treyrock had both ceased to exist, and Zaknafein Semfrey was on his way to becoming Zaknafein Do'Urden. Zaknafein took the name Do'Urden and the role Matron Malice had purchased, but his first true work came on the road, far from her walls. Jarlaxle brought him in on a Bregandierth contract, and that contract carried the weight of the first house behind it. Matron Mother Evenel Baenre wanted a matron in Chednasad dead. Shiva Zalvir of House Zalvir, the family behind the trading concern called Black Claw Mercantile, had spoken ill of Baenre to a handmaiden of Loth, and Baenre did not let such words stand. Jarlaxle, Zaknafein, and Arathis Hune traveled 5-10 days through the Underdark to the city of Shimmering Webs to collect the debt. Riding the caravan toward Chednasad, the three spoke of the kill ahead, and Jarlaxle pressed Zaknafein on how he made his peace with murder done in another's name. Zaknafein gave him the truth of it. He told himself there was a finite number of priestesses and matrons in the world, and that everyone he sent to death brought him closer to the end of them all. This was the man beneath the weapon master. He served Loth City, killed under Loth's banner, and hated the goddess with an endless patience. He carried his rebellion in the choices the city let him make, in the mercy he showed common males and the certainty he showed their priestesses, and he kept it hidden behind a dour face for centuries. The mission to Chednasad turned bloody inside a webbed inn where an ambush of warriors, a wizard, and a press of bugbears caught the three rogues in close quarters. Zaknafein held a flank beside one of Jarlaxle's summoned monsters and cut his way through the trap. When the city guard descended on draglines and war spiders, he made his escape down a sheer cavern wall by dragging his blade through the city's own webbing to cut a strip and riding it down like a rope to the level below. He reached House Zalvir to finish the contract and found the matron already fled. Her daughter Saprina waited in her place. Saprina had betrayed her own mother to ascend with Baenre's blessing, and she stood before a man who wanted nothing in the world so much as to kill a priestess of Loth. He sheathed his blades and let her live out of his duty to Jarlaxle alone. Matron Shiva he hunted down and finished later, and that kill he took gladly. By the time the caravan rolled home, Zaknafein had become what Jarlaxle needed him to be. He was the blade of Bregandierth when the work demanded one, the weapon master of House Do'Urden when malice demanded one, and a man with a city full of enemies worth the killing. A century passed in House Do'Urden, and Zaknafein spent it as Matron Malice's blade, carrying her house toward the seat she coveted on the ruling council. His reputation grew large enough to make him a target, and Malice answered that danger by keeping him close. The most dangerous warrior in Menzoberranzan lived much of his life behind his own walls, deployed when she needed him and stored away when she did not. His friendship with Jarlaxle was his one door out. When Zaknafein could slip free to the stench streets, the two returned to the games that kept them sane. They raced each other across the rooftops and stalagmites of the city and even held a years-long drinking contest. These were the hours that reminded a caged man he was still alive. Zaknafein and Dabney had also become lovers, and they found their reprieve on a quiet ledge high on the city's eastern wall, where the stench of the slave hovels kept other drow away. From there they could look out over Menzoberranzan together, the whole cavern glowing with the shifting fairy fire of 100 houses. Dabney called the view beautiful. Zaknafein answered that it should be. The drow held the power to build whatever they chose, yet they spent it killing one another instead, raising their walls against each other rather than against the world outside. He spoke of a people so ruled by fear that they had grown afraid of being afraid, clinging to an ancient grievance against the god who was once said to have cast them down, a story that may never have happened in the way they had been taught. He named them all prisoners in jails of their own making. Zak's peace broke when Matron Bearton Fay set her sights on him. Her weapon master was a familiar face under a new name. He was Duvan Treyrock, the noble son whose house Zaknafein had helped destroy a century before, carrying his grudge across the whole of that century and serving now as Avanvesa Faybranch. Bearton wanted Zaknafein dead to wound House Do'Urden. Duvan wanted him dead for revenge. They moved together, ambushing him in the oozing Myconid tavern, and when the ambush failed, Jarlaxle turned the matter into a formal duel in the alley behind the tavern. Arathis Hune, Jarlaxle's own lieutenant and Zaknafein's rival within Bregan de Aerth, had arranged a psionic strike through his Oblodran lover, a mind blast meant to stun Zaknafein and hand the victory to Duvan. Jarlaxle had anticipated the treachery and lent Zaknafein his magical eye patch, hidden by a Dweomer so that it was undetectable. The patch let Zaknafein withstand the mind blast. He cut Duvan down on the edge of death and stopped only when the priestess Dabney pledged her fealty to spare him. Arathis Hune wanted more. He arranged a second confrontation, lured into the open by Dabney under the orders of Matron Solez Armgo. Solez had her own reasons to want Zaknafein gone. His death would cripple Matron Malice's climb, and it would spare her own weapon master, the hulking Uther Gentle, from ever having to face him. Zaknafein walked into the alley knowing the trap and called Arathis Hune out for his treachery. They drew their blades. A psionic blast dropped them both before either could finish it, thrown by a young drow Zaknafein had never seen. Jarlaxle stepped between them and ended the fight. The young drow was Kimuriel Oblodja. The reckoning between Zaknafein and Arathis Hune came soon after, and Zaknafein won it. He killed the assassin with a strike he had perfected through countless solitary hours, a sequence of over-the-shoulder parries and reversing thrusts built for one ambush from one angle. That victory carried a price. The first era of his friendship with Jarlaxle ended there. One question had followed Zaknafein for 100 years, the question of whether he or Uther Gentle Armgo was the greatest warrior. That question found its answer in the same period, in a fight only 5 drow witnessed. Zaknafein and Uther Gentle met blade to blade, and Zaknafein was winning. He held the upper hand and stood close to the kill when Matron Soleil's forces pulled Uther Gentle from the field. Solez and her daughter, Mesberis, suppressed what those 5 had seen because the truth was unacceptable. The commoner who had clawed up from nothing was the better warrior, and the Armgos could not let the city know it. For most of his life, Zaknafein had feared death the way he believed every honest creature feared it, and for centuries he had found nothing worth more than his own survival. Fatherhood changed that. He spoke of it to Jarlaxle. His children were a kind of immortality, the one answer he had ever found to that fear. And they were a deeper thing than that. To look upon his child was to know vulnerability, to know there was a person in the world more important to him than himself, one whose suffering would wound him 100 times past his own. He feared death and did not want to die. He would still throw himself before a spear meant for his child without a moment's pause, even a child raised to serve the Spider Queen. He spoke those words before anything tested them. By 1296, nearly 3 centuries into his service to House Do'Urden, Zaknafein learned that Matron Malice carried his child. He had fathered one daughter by her already, Vierna, born long before and indoctrinated into the priesthood of Loth. Now Malice descended into the Stench Streets to seek a seer named Palcross, who looked into his crystal ball and named Zaknafein the sire. What the seer saw and did not say was the child's sex. He saw a son. Malice assumed a daughter and never thought to ask, and Palcross held his tongue because correcting a matron on so dangerous a point could end a man's life. Malice carried the pregnancy toward a purpose darker than motherhood. She intended to use the forbidden ritual of birth magic, drawing on the moment of childbirth to power the destruction of a rival house. She obtained the ritual from Gelrus Hanet, the disfigured sorcerer master known as the Faceless One, and she set her sights on House de Vere. The child born in that casting would arrive into a house at war, and a third son born of such a ritual belonged to Loth by the oldest of Drow traditions. The child came in early 1297, born as House de Vere burned under Malice's ritual. It was a son, the third son of House Do'Urden, his life forfeit to Loth the moment he drew breath. He survived for one reason alone. The eldest son, Nalfain, was murdered by the second boy, Deneen, pacifying Loth's demand and making room for the boy Malice named Drizzt. Zaknafein had a son, and a son who should not have lived. He held the infant in the days after the fall of House de Vere, and the vulnerability he had described to Jarlaxle stopped being an idea. The commoner who rose to become the deadliest blade in Menzoberranzan, the killer who hated the goddess he served, the man who had spent hundreds of years waiting for something worth more than his own survival, now held that something in his arms. Everything Zaknafein would become, the father, the teacher, the rebel who gave his life so his son could escape the Underdark, began here. By the time he held his newborn son, Zaknafein had lived nearly 500 years in the Underdark. He had clawed up from nothing to become the finest warrior in the city. He had buried his rebellion beneath a mask, but kept it burning underneath, killing the priestesses of Loth one by one and waiting for something to change. In the infant Drizzt, he found it. The rest of Zaknafein's story is the story of what that meant, the training of a son who would surpass him, the war he waged for that son's soul, and the sacrifice that would define them both. I highly recommend reading the Generations trilogy, Timeless, Boundless, and Relentless, to get the full scope of Zaknafein's early days and his friendship with Jarlaxle. The series absolutely conjures the Dark Elf trilogy. If you've enjoyed this tale of Zaknafein and want to support the channel, check out the Drow Historian Patreon, where you can download my custom D&D 5.5e stat block for Zaknafein and all of the Legend of Drizzt characters. You'll also gain access to 2 bonus podcasts a month and help me keep this channel alive. If you want more Legend of Drizzt lore, check out my video on the beginnings of Artemis Entrere or my complete guide to Drizzt Do'Urden. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for more lore from the Forgotten Realms and the Legend of Drizzt.